Well, good morning, everyone. Afternoon, I guess, to most of us on the West Coast and the East, 12 p.m. on the West and 3 p.m. on the East. Some of you are already logging in. You will notice a chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We'd love to hear who you are, where you're from, what church, and make sure you send it to all the attendees and panelists. We are excited that you're joining us today, and we will begin right at noon. Great to have you on, Bob. Dennis, glad you're here. Jacob, Maria is here. So excited. Jennifer Phillips from Corbett. Hey, Jennifer, glad you're on today. Ray and Don Hauk from DC. Love you guys. Claudia's here. Francis is here. Fantastic. If I miss you, I'm sorry. It's going so fast. Whitney's here. Diana, glad to see you all the way from Georgia. Patty Downs, glad you're here. Dale Swanson, so good to see you on here, Dale. Some of you who are just joining us, make sure you announce yourself in the chat feature. We want to know you're here. Chuck, good to see you, Pastor. Jennifer, glad you're here. Jesse, Barry, all the way from Canada. Fantastic. Hi, Kim, glad you're here. So this is a webinar, not a Zoom call. So you're probably wondering, why am I not seeing faces on here? Well, that's because this is going to be a presentation. So your way to communicate with us is through the chat feature. Also, we're going to have a time for Q&A. So you'll see a Q&A box. So when you hear a speaker and a question comes to you, go ahead and pop it right in that Q&A box. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll do the best that we can today. Chris Kahn, Old Oaks Ranch, so glad you're here. Jesse from Ontario, California. Dawn from Vegas. We have people from Hawaii, so fantastic. Peru. Hey, Candy from La Grande, Oregon, my hometown. It's good to see you. Mary from Washington, Wesley from El Segundo. This is awesome. We'll get started here just in a couple minutes. As I said, this is a webinar, not a Zoom call, so you won't be seeing faces except for our panelists. We have a Q&A function, so you'll be able to ask your questions. But if you just joined us today, make sure that you announce yourself via the chat box and tell us where you're from. I see Greg and Sandy, Carrie, Fernando. Hey, Fernando, from Santa Barbara. Wesley, Carrie Jenkins. Hey, friend. Whitney from Yakima. We love our Yakima family. Carlos, good to see you. Sam from Nigeria, fantastic. Frank from Mid-South District. Michelle from Washington. Caesar from Idaho. They keep coming in. I don't know if you guys know this, but we have, you wouldn't know. How would you know? You're not in charge of this webinar, but we have over 200 registrants from people around the US and the world, and we are so excited. And for those of you that you're gonna love it, you're absolutely gonna love it. And you may think, I wish my staff was on this call. Well, it's gonna be recorded and you'll be able to get that onto your staff, your friends, your family, anywhere. Go ahead and forward that email. So Lena will have that by the end of today. Craig from Salem, Jennifer Thickpen, hey Jen. Hi, Pastor Juan. Dan from Santa Rosa. Jen, John, Danielle, they keep coming in. Terry, Priscilla. Lynn from Hilo, Hawaii. Hi, Lynn, good to see you. Renee from Michigan. Jesse from Palm Springs. Hi, Greg and Stacy Schaub, glad you're on here. We'll wait just another minute. Again, if you just got on the call, make sure that you announce yourself and where you're from. This is really the biggest classroom that we've had in a while. In fact, we've had online classes, but this is a big classroom right now. We have about 200 registered for this webinar. It's a wonderful group on this topic, leading beyond crisis. And so we're so thankful you could join us today. There won't be live interaction, but if you do have a question, make sure you put it in the chat box, actually in the Q&A function, and we will be checking that today and being able to actually ask our panelists after their presentation a question or two. We have Don from the chaplaincy, we have PJ Moon from Mid-South, Deb Prosser, Vegas, Bob, Virginia, Karen. I mean, they just keep pouring in. We're so happy. I'm really hesitant to get started just yet until we get everyone on the call, but give it about one more minute. Bakersfield, Linda, Angela from Bakersfield, Linda from Washington, Coach Tim Cook from LPU Athletics. I'm glad you took time off the court to join us today. Dave from Washington, the Cheneys from Central Pacific. Fantastic, fantastic. Well, we're gonna go ahead and get started right now. It's about the top of the hour. Again, we have 200 people registered, and we are so excited for what God's going to do today. My name is Angie Ritchie. I'm the president here at Life Pacific University, and it is my joy to be able to add some content and value to this webinar today, and we have such incredible panelists. I want to give a special thanks to our director. Actually, it's Dr. Remy Lewanson is the Associate Dean for Leadership Studies here at Life Pacific University. I also want to thank Lena Martz, who will be facilitating a bit of this today. So thank you both. To provide context for this webinar, Leading Beyond Crisis, you know, our personal lives and organizations have been disrupted by COVID-19. That's not a surprise to any of us. And we are all responding quickly and adapting to new ways of life at every level: online church, homeschooling, employee furloughs, no prom, postponed graduations, ill family members. Many of us have been, we may be getting our sea legs, but this crisis that we are experiencing isn't going to end when the curve is flattened and stay-at-home orders are lifted. So we must prepare for the challenges and opportunities to come. Today, we have some of the best seasoned leaders and organizational strategists to help us think about leading our organizations and ourselves into a future that is still uncertain. Topics include today, effective leadership response, structuring an organizational response, and how leading yourself now will be reflected in those you lead in the future. So I'm going to start with introductions and give honor where it's due. Our first presenter today will be Reverend Ricky Temple. Pastor Ricky is one of America's most innovative and influential leaders. He serves as senior pastor of Overcoming by Faith Ministries in Savannah, Georgia, a vibrant and community-engaged church where he has faithfully served since 1981. For over 30 years, he has touched the lives around the world through radio and television. His deep commitment to developing leaders, churches, and families has made him a highly sought-after speaker and consultant. For his committed service and ministry excellence, Pastor Temple was awarded an honorary doctorate of divinity from the International Church of the Foursquare Gospel in 1997. He has a master's degree in strategic leadership from none other than Life Pacific University, as well as an undergraduate degree in theology from Life Pacific. He is a doctoral candidate for a Doctor of Divinity at King's Seminary. Our second presenter is Dr. Jared Roth. He serves as co-lead pastor of Evergreen Christian Center, a thriving 91-year-old Foursquare church in Hillsboro, Oregon that serves public schools in their community. And I love this. They send out a pastor or church planter each year. Jared holds a doctorate in organization change from Pepperdine University, building on previous degrees in business management and leadership, and was awarded a doctorate of divinity. Jared taught in the LPU MASL program. He's been the director of a professional MBA program at George Fox University, where he taught courses in strategy, innovation, and change. He also taught at Portland Seminary. And after planting a church at age 23, Jared served as Northwest District Administrator, National Church Director of Church Planting, Foursquare, U.S. General Supervisor, VP and CEO, and Interim President. Jared, I don't know what you haven't done. He's also served as chair of Life Pacific University Board and the Foursquare Foundation Board. How blessed are we today? And last but not least is our president-elect of the Foursquare Church, Reverend Randy Remington. Randy and his wife, Sandy, have been married for 31 years and have 3 adult sons. After serving churches in Washington, they have spent the last 17 years serving as the lead pastors of a vibrant, multi-ethnic, and multi-generational, socioeconomically diverse congregation in Beaverton, Oregon. And in May 2019, Randy was selected as the next U.S. Foursquare president. He is a double life alumnus with a master's degree in strategic leadership. Wow, what a master's in strategic leadership can get you. Absolutely amazing. We are so honored that you are with us, everyone. And we're going to kick off our first presentation by Reverend Ricky Temple. Hello, Ricky. Glad you're here.
Leadership response. I am really touched by today's events. This has been an amazing season for all of us in America and the world. And the question is, how do you effectively respond? And I think there's something that's studied in adaptive leadership that can help us understand that. And it's called adaptive leadership theory. And this is a theory that unpacks the process you go through to adapt to something. Adapting to leadership is about confronting and solving a problem. It's the call to look at something that's difficult and say, what can I do? It's not a normal problem. It's not something that just kind of you're used to. It's a problem that says you've never been here before. And COVID-19 has brought to us something we've never seen before. And I think one of the problems is a lot of people are completely overwhelmed by it. So let me show you how you deal with it. The first thing you do is you have to understand the challenge of adaptive leadership. There's some leadership issues that we face that are technical issues, which means you kind of know how to deal with it. You know, the car is broke, you take it to the place, they fix it. Adaptive problems are different. These are problems that you have to research and you have to go and discover how to fix it. So the car breaks, you don't know how to fix it yourself. You can't not just an oil change. You've got to get the manual out, you got to look it up, or you got to write a manual. We're in a write a manual season. We're in a season now where it's very difficult for people to even know where to start. You can't go to church. It's like, well, who am I after that? And so what that brings us to is something, and if you've noticed, we're in an adaptive moment here in Georgia. It's lightning, but you'll be okay. So we're having this amazing moment where the world is being forced to adapt to new life. So a guy named Heifetz was one of the first guys who talked about this. He was one of the early teachers on adaptive leadership, and the whole concept of a person learning how to manage those moments when you feel like your hair is being pulled out. For a lot of pastors, it's incredibly difficult. And I'm going to talk about some of those things that are difficult. One of them is they don't know how to put it theologically in place, because a lot of people are struggling. They're thinking, well, I thought, you know, I prayed, I talked to God, I asked God for help, and things are fine. But Heifetz pointed out, no, there are times when you have to research and discover. And so let me give you a verse in the Bible. It's in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 6, where theologically there's a moment in David's life where we see him having to adapt. David had made some mistakes. He'd made some leadership decisions. And the Bible said David became greatly distressed. Why? Because the people spoke of stoning him. Because of the soul of all the people were grieved, every man for his sons and his daughters. But David, in the middle of that, did something courageous. He encouraged himself. Now, he had made some mistakes. All the men's wives and children were taken captive, and David was being threatened by his own soldiers, and he found himself overwhelmed. In this moment, when you're overwhelmed like this, it really is hard. It's hard to find, who am I now? Am I a pastor? Am I a preacher? Because for some of us, there's no theological space for this kind of moment. But this is where real theology is built. When you're forced to adapt and rediscover who you are, when you don't have your church services, you don't have a worship team. I don't know why we think Jesus had a worship team. You know, before he introduced the guys to talk, they said, well, Jesus, come on up here. We're gonna have the guys and disciples sing a song. They didn't have any of that. They had to adapt to a life, and just like we're adapting to a new life, a new beginning. And when we get to those moments, we have to learn from David. Encourage yourself in the Lord your God. You may not have all the things you had. And so it starts off with you doing something courageous. You ready? Face your issues. Face your challenge and don't panic. I say all C's on deck. Okay, I'm a little bit nervous. Can't go to church on Sundays, don't have all the things I want, but I'm not going to ignore and run from the obvious. This is going to be a fight that I'm in, and I can't cover my face and run from it. This is a 10-round fight, not a 3-round fight. Now, here's what I tell people. When you're in a 3-round fight, you have to make sure you understand that it's a 3-round fight. But if it's a 10-round fight and you cover your face and you run after the 3rd round, you get beat up the last 7. So that means you need to plan for a longer fight. And then once you face your challenge, the next thing you need to do is this. You need to admit, okay, I'm grieving. I'm going through a grieving season, and I'm having a moment where I'm missing 3 things, especially for you leaders. I call it building grief, face-to-face grief, and identity grief. You don't have a building anymore. Preachers always talk about, well, how are you doing? Good, a building. We're growing a building. The building's filling up. Well, you don't have that anymore. Now you don't have the face-to-face. It's an empty room you're preaching to. And now you don't have, man, this I'm a pastor thing. When this first happened, it really challenged me. Am I more than just a building? Are we as a church more than just a building? So you face your grief, and the next thing you need to do is not only face your grief, you need to be honest about your loss and face your new options. Tom Rainer said something that was really powerful. Tom Rainer said, you have a clean slate. This is a brand new beginning for you. Your life is not the same. Pretend that your church is starting all over again. You're starting a new beginning. And remember, Romans 8:28 said this, all things work together for the good. That's right. You being home, ministering on a computer, talking to people, it's a new path for your feet. And face that and say, we're going to create new plans. So what I started doing was writing a new plan. That's one of the things I did. The time we started this, I said, okay, what are we going to do next? I don't dwell on what's wrong today. I think about what I can do tomorrow. And then next thing you should do is consider this. You should consider finding a way in your life to say, okay, I'm going to encourage myself. I'm not going to let myself stop believing in the future. So when you write this plan out, it changes everything. When you say, I have a future and I believe in it. So here's what I told myself. I had to start telling myself, Temple, you're all right. You're all right. And I told my church, we're okay. I called everybody. We have several thousand members. I had them divide up into small groups and we start calling everybody. And I encourage every pastor to do that. It's an effective way to encourage people. And then I'm telling you who are listening today, I don't care how it looks, how it feels, you're going to be okay. In the end, you're going to be okay, because here's what I believe is happening. You're going to have a new future. This is the time to embrace a brand new future. This is it. Plan for a life after this season. How are you going to lead differently? What did you learn in this season? You learned that your technology was important. You learned that a number of other things were important. Find new areas of need in your community. We gave away hundreds of meals, food that we had waiting to serve our college students, waiting to serve our members and other events. We gave it all away. Use this lesson as a memorial. Build something around this. You know, after Israel crossed over on the Red Sea, they took those stones and they built a memorial. Learn from this. Save money. Build better reserves. Technology. How you train leaders. There's something about this whole process that in the end will make us all stronger and better. And so I think it's all about how you respond to this moment and embrace it, adapt to it, understand that it is a challenge, and I believe that we can get there. So I hope that what I've said has been helpful to you, and I hope you apply this to your life. And remember, you have a future. And I thank you so much for the opportunity. God bless you.
Pastor Ricky, thank you so much for that. Okay, so a couple questions have come in. Tell me a little bit, unpack the grief, because, you know, we have to adapt. In fact, most leaders have gone right to adapting, decision-making, planning. They haven't even thought about their feelings. Really, there is no time. So can you unpack that a little bit?
What I did was I just got honest with myself and admitted, you know, Ricky Temple, you're grieving. Tears came to my eyes when I watched our Easter service. You know, because a lot of our identity is tied into the building and the services and all the things that we do, especially when you got all these services and all these people. And so having an honest moment with myself where I realized that I'm grieving over a loss, but then I've learned that I can have a gain. So being honest with myself was the first place that started for me.
So good. One more question before we move on is someone asked, how do I plan for the future? How do we as a church prepare for the future? I mean, so much tyranny of the urgent. How do we take time to pause and think about what's ahead? How do we change and adapt to a different time?
Well, what you do is, first of all, you write down how you feel. This is a great place to start, you know, and then write down what's true and what's not true. I still have a church. Just because they're not in the building doesn't mean I don't have a church. And I learned, for example, I looked at our money and how our setting, 70% of our income came outside the building. Now it's 94%. Do I need to change the way I manage our money? Do I change the way I communicate to people? I started writing down those things, and it's amazing as I started writing and praying, God started guiding me. I believe that God guides you as you go. And so sometimes you don't really know how to fix it, how to plan for it. Just start and he'll meet you.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Pastor Ricky. We're all learning as we go, aren't we?
Yeah.
But I think the key is taking time for yourself to sit in quiet and
Right.
process, and God will map out a plan. I mean, we're learning as we go. Thank you so much. We're going to go on to a structural response. We have Dr. Jared Ross. So Jared, please take it away.
My pleasure to be with you today. And I've been asked to talk a little bit about structuring organizational and congregational response. And this just wonderfully follows Pastor Ricky's description of adaptive leadership. I want to talk from a point of view about models, but really from the point of view of a practitioner. And I'm not at all sure that what we're doing at Evergreen is a role model for anyone, but I hope that the thoughtfulness about what we're doing and the selection of models to help us understand what's happening and how we're responding will be helpful for you. So first of all, probably many of us have conceptualized several phases of moving through this crisis. I actually saw a 4-phase the other day. I was quite impressed. They came up with one that others hadn't apparently, but I can only handle 3. So we're thinking about our response in these 3 phases. The first one's crisis. That's our reaction. The second phase is continuity, how we're responding in this interim season. And then the third phase will be the new normal, where we reset whatever and whenever that is. At Evergreen, we decided to just arbitrarily choose some time frames for that. The 4 weeks we gave ourselves to react to crisis. What the heck's going on today, and what do we need to take care of, and how are we going to take care of services for this weekend? That was the reaction mode. Now we've moved into this continuity period, and that's really what I've been asked to talk about today. This topic is leading beyond the time of crisis. We've arbitrarily chosen a 14-week period that takes us about toward the end of the month of July. That may be wildly optimistic. That may be horribly pessimistic. Who knows? But it was helpful for us as a team to think about a season of continuity that had a period of time to it, so that we actually are able to do some planning across those 14 weeks, and we've engaged in that. And of course, as we move toward new normals, we'll discover what those are. So in that, we decided that having 3 models would be helpful for us in our planning in this continuity period. And we chose one that is probably common to many of you. And then we made up a couple on our own. And so for better or for worse, here they are. The first model is what we're calling changeability. What will never change, what may change, and what will change. The second model, common language for many of us as it relates to a local congregation, our cause, our community, our corporation. And then our third model is geographic. It's here, near, and far, language that we use that comes obviously directly out of the Great Commission. So let's take a look at a matrix that we've created. And on this slide, and then in just a moment on the following slide, it's the interaction of these models in how we're choosing to think, pray, plan, and then communicate. The first one is the conceptual model. Starts with the question, so what won't change, what may change, and what will change? And then let's describe that as it relates to our cause, our community, and our corporation. At Evergreen, we've chosen to describe our cause as we help people find and follow Jesus here, near, and far. We think that that probably is not going to change. We're going to stick with that one. When it comes to our community, we have something called the Evergreen Way. It's summarized in 4 words: God, gather, group, give. We don't think that that evergreen way of community discipleship and sharing together is probably going to change. And then our commitment for the corporate side, the business side of the church, is that we will function with exemplary stewardship. We don't think that that's going to change. Now, what may change about the cause, the community, and the corporation, and what will change, that's where our thinking, our praying, and our communication is giving a lot of attention. But this gives us a matrix. As Ricky was mentioning earlier, what's your anchor? You've got to be anchored to these things that are true, they're right, they're eternal, they're going to stick with us, and that we can be settled in. Let's know what those are, and then let's be equally certain about the things that are flexible and should adapt and change. It gave us an opportunity to think about it in those three areas of the church. And our church council, which we're so blessed to have just remarkable leaders, school principals, architects, small business owners, the list goes on, CFOs. We chose in our weekly communication with the council to use cause, community, and corporation to describe what we're thinking, how we're praying, the initiatives that we're taking, and the results that we're getting. And we got immediate feedback from them on how grateful they were, because they all have their own worlds where they're making adaptive leadership, but it's hard for them to conceptualize what does that really look like in the church. And these three words were very helpful for them to get a handle on how we're holistically caring for the church in ways and language that were helpful for them. The second matrix that we put together continues with what won't change, what may change, and what will change. But in this case, we're looking at geography. And our geography is here, near, and far. So what won't change about the here? Near for us is our community. And for example, we are highly committed to working in and through as a benefit to our public schools. That's not changing. In fact, our quick questions were, how can we serve public schools that are closed in terms of their structures, but still active in terms of not only their educational functions, but also a lot of their social services as well, including feeding. And then how does this affect our FAR commitments in international mission as well? Well, enough of those models, but just to say again, in summary of those, it's been very helpful for us to have some kind of contextual, conceptual, and geographic framework to talk about what's not going to change. Let's anchor to that. Let's be committed to that. Let's communicate peace and security and stability around that. Let's be honest about what might change as we experiment with adaptation. And then let's have a good idea, if we can, about some things that certainly will change, so that we as leaders are not deceived as we move toward an uncertain future, that we're not expecting that people are going to come back the same way in the same ways. Let's be ahead of that. Let's be providing pathways for people to function in this culturally transformational time, the only guarantee of which is we are all going to be different, and we're going to live in some different ways on the other side. I want to conclude with something that I was inspired by a couple of days ago by a presentation that Ed Stetzer made, and he inspired these questions and a graph that we'll end with. I received permission to share these with you as well, but I just thought these were some really helpful questions to be asking. How will it change the way we gather? How will it change our children and student practices and policies? For the sake of time, I won't go off on that, but wow, as a church highly committed to children and students, this is a huge area of our conversation and prayer and communication and ideation about how are we going to care for these kids who are going to be brought by parents that have some very different views about what standards and practices should be for their children and for their youth. How will it make us leverage technology more for ministry and mission? And then how can the church move from sole reliance on tithes and offerings? Finally, I wanted to mention a chart here, which we found very helpful. As we know, churches have been asked, along with other organizations, in most places, at least across the US, to close down in phases from large groups to less large groups to small groups to no groups. And it seems to be that's likely that there will be a reemergence from this time that will be a reverse order of that, to small groups, to a little larger groups, and then eventually to the largest venues as well. Obviously, this has real implications for megachurches that are going to be probably the last that are able to go back to the very large meeting. But for we as a church, we saw how we position here, and now we're asking the question, how can we as a larger congregation than some of these numbers reemerge by acting like a smaller congregation that's made up of several different units? And it's been fun for us to start that creative thinking about what does it look like for us to subdivide ourselves into ways so that we can all begin meeting together again, but maybe not all meeting together at the same time or place, which we don't anyway. But the point is to be creatively thinking about how to organize ourselves in different ways for this reemergence time, which could be as brief as a month, and it could be as long as several months as well. Well, I hope that this has been helpful for you a little bit in thinking about leading beyond the time of crisis, and particularly in structuring organizational and congregational response.
Dr. Jared, absolutely outstanding. Comments are flowing in. The models that you presented are going to be so helpful. And I just want to let everyone know on this call that the presentation recording as well as the slides will be sent out, and you can get these out to your congregations in your districts. So we're so grateful for that. Jared, I have a question for you that's come in. What's been your biggest obstacle or challenge in maintaining continuity?
I think for us, we just had this real, fear and care and concern about every person out there in our sphere of influence, and how can we reach them and touch them. And we decided that our fastest response for most would be text on a personal level. And so, as Ricky mentioned, they're using the phone call, which is a far more personal touch, and we've done later as well. But for us to take the responsibility to initiate contact with every person. And that has been children as young as including kindergarten. So that was our baseline. Kindergarten up have had some kind of personal outreach and touch by church leaders.
Wow, that's powerful. We can't underestimate the importance of communication. Jared, along just a piggyback on that, what other forms of communication are you using? It sounds like you're using the very individual, high touch. What's the macro communication look like for you?
So probably like many of you, we became far better in our social media presence than we have before. Our target audience in this 91-year-old 5-generation church is a 32-year-old mom. So the first thing we did was, what are the platforms? What are the topics? What are the ways of engagement in crazy time that a 32-year-old mom is going to most benefit from? And we immediately, in our crisis response, developed out those platforms and forms of communication, simultaneously asking the question for our students and also for our children. And then we've continued our current communication flows as well to provide that continuity. And then we've done something that surprised me, but I thought was brilliant. I didn't think of it. And that is, we have gone old school, and we are sending stuff snail mail. And we have discovered that there are some students that the first time that they have received a handwritten note or a card or a letter in their life was in the last 4 weeks, as we have gone to what for some is a very different medium, high touch, high personal, and is a wow factor that catches surprise. So we're using every platform we can. At the same time, we're rather moderate in our content. We feel like people are getting tons of content, and we've tried to make our communication a relational response more than a content response. Content, we're doing services, etc., a few devotionals during Holy Week, etc. But again, we've decided to err on the side of high touch, low content.
Oh, that's so good. It's really people focused. So maybe this next question, we're doing great for time. So I have one more question. One is, have you had experience with people who have different opinions of what will not, may, or what will change? And how do you make decisions in light of not having certainty about really anything?
Yeah. Well, we have probably a couple of advantages that not all may have enjoyed coming into this time. The one is that we have a high alignment between the staff and our council. Alignment in terms of roles and shared information and about who makes decisions about what. And I mentioned that those are really the only two major decision-making groups. And as a result of that, that's streamlined in itself. When it comes to the staff, another, I don't know if it's an advantage, this may just be crazy or OCD, but we plan our weekend services 18 months in advance. So we have an annual calendar. Part of that is because of a whole variety of reasons go into that, teaching team development, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, we had an advantage of having a year calendar of services projected. So for us to moderate back by coming to a 14-week planning horizon, that happened within a context of a 12-month planning horizon. So we were making adaptations to plans rather than creating new ones. So here's the shameless plug for the MASL program. That kind of strategic and innovative thinking can be very helpful in preparation for a crisis, not just during the management during the crisis. Our advantage was we were able to have plans to moderate against rather than a crisis just to react to.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Jared Roth. Everyone, again, the comments have been outstanding. Last but not least, our President-elect, Reverend Randy Remington, on really the personal life of the leader. So President Randy, take it over.
While I was muted. Greetings from Portland, Oregon. It's a pleasure to be here with my good and very smart friends, Ricky, Jared, and Angie, and all of you. Hearing some of the names listed off as we began, it's fun to see that we could virtually gather like this. I get to talk a little bit about more at a heart level of who we are as leaders. One of the primary things we see in the New Testament in regards to leadership is that leadership is not a person that does a certain kind of job. Actually, a leader is a certain kind of person. And that matters because we're not just leading structures and systems, we're leading people. It's people touching people. We're following Jesus and people are following us. And so the emphasis in the New Testament really is on character, our interior life, our relationship with Jesus, our relationships, and primarily as they're listed in the qualifications of eldership, our relationships in the home. And so who we are in this season is going to have a big determination for who we're going to be on the other side of it. And so the decisions we're making now, the things that are we're experiencing, how we're walking through this, the transformation taking place or not taking place is going to determine how we're going to lead in the future. And something that has helped me significantly over the years, and in particular because historically the people of God have always gone to the Psalms in times of loss, in times of grief, in times of crisis, in times of uncertainty, confusion, and found great comfort there. And there's a theologian named Walter Brueggemann who has done a wonderful job of in his commentary on the Psalms, but he categorizes the Psalms in three ways, and in doing so presents to us really how our life can move in relationship to growing in Jesus and growing personally. And so first of all, he talks about orientation, where our life is very secure in the sense that it's oriented a certain way. It's well ordered, something makes sense to us. Even God makes sense to us in this season. Things are predictable to some degree, peaceable. But then disorientation happens, and it's usually suddenly. There's pain involved, brokenness, disruption, confusion, unpredictability. This is where we lament, we cry out, sometimes we repent, sometimes the best side of us doesn't always come out. But this is where we really learn to walk by faith. It's kind of like the snow globe just gets shaken and everything just starts swirling. And all of our equilibrium is off. But this is where God then meets us. Jesus steps into that place, and there's a new revelation we get of who God is in our life and who we are in him. And we come out of this because we always do. Storms don't last forever. We just know that in nature. Hurricanes, tsunami, they don't always go on and on and on. There is an end, and there will be an end to this. But there's out of the disorientation comes a reorientation, a greater revelation of who God is, a deepening of our faith, a new way of having our lives oriented around God's love and power and worship that results. We come out different, kind of like a 2.0 version of ourselves. And so disorientation can reorient us into a new way of living. and consequently is a new way of leading. And so when these kind of things happen that we're in the middle of right now, it allows us to step back and reflect a bit more in a deeper way about what's really important, what matters, reassess patterns, develop new rhythms that are going to be life-giving and sustainable for us, not only through this, but on the other side of it. And I want to read a section of scripture just real quickly and make a few comments on it as an example of this. And you know the story well in Mark 4:35. It says, that day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him, and a furious squall came up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion, and the disciples woke him up and said, teacher, don't you care if we drown? And I'm sure they said it a little more frantic than that. He got up and he rebuked the wind and he said to the waves, quiet, be still. And then the wind died down and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And they were terrified and they said to each other, who is this? Even in the wind and the waves, they obey him. So 3 things real quickly in this time of disorientation that can become transformational and lead us into a reorienting of our lives. The first is this, you're still on mission. Even though this crisis has happened, that God's call and God's purpose and God's plan on your life, that's not at risk. Circumstances have changed, but the mission hasn't, and we might have to make some adjustments. But our purpose hasn't been altered, and it's the nature of storms to want to abort the mission, to get us off track, to get us distracted. But notice even the disciples, as they were with Jesus and they were in the boat he told them to get into, they were in the will of Jesus and they still experienced the storm. So the storm has the capacity to reveal some things to us, but what matters most for us in moments like this is, first of all, remember what Jesus said. We live our lives according to his promises. What has he told us? He said in verse 35, we're going to go over to the other side. And the reason Jesus was so calm in this moment is because he was living his life according to what the Father said. He knew his mission wasn't to come and die and drown in the Sea of Galilee. He knew that his life was going to go to a cross where he would lay down his life as a ransom for many. And so he was living his life based on the purpose and the word of the Father in his life. And so remember what God has said to you in things like this, in times like this. What are the promises he's spoken to you? They become very stabilizing. They become very anchoring. And remember that this isn't just about getting through something. This is about going to. We're going to a place. There's people to be reached. And Luke's gospel tells us about this incident, that there was a demoniac on the other side of the storm that they were going to encounter that would become liberated, delivered from that oppression. And it wasn't that they were just trying to get through the storm. They were actually going to. There was an assignment. And so remember that this is a promise we're living in accordance, that God has said something about our lives that he's not forgotten or he's not turned away from, but it's about who we're called to reach as well. And the reason this matters is because leaders take the long view. We don't just see today. It's the nature of leadership that more than anyone else that we tend to view things in the context of the long term. The reality is, for most people, it's mostly about the here and now, but we're looking at our situation, and no situation is all downside. There's lots of opportunities here, and we see, even in the disruption and the disorientation, opportunities to still live on mission. Andy Stanley says leaders can afford to be uncertain. Nobody expects us to have clarity and certainty about everything in a time like this. But he said you cannot afford to be unclear. People will not follow fuzzy leadership. And if we know, even when things swirl around us, we're still here to reach people. We're still here to be in relationship with Jesus. We're still here to engage one another in community and encouragement and relationship. Then we will keep the course. The second thing is you're still human. And just real quickly, let me just emphasize what I think is one of the unique parts about this story. One of the things we recognize quickly in a crisis is that we have limits. we don't stop being human in a crisis and all of a sudden become superhuman. We're not exceptions to the rule. We have limits. And limits teach us dependability and humility. The fact that Jesus was asleep on a cushion, I love that that detail is given in this story. Jesus in his humanity was asleep in a storm. And that gives me permission to realize, even as I'm all hands on deck, I'm just fully attentive to the needs and the responsibilities. I have to eat, I have to sleep, I have emotions, I experience things. I'm not robotic, I'm human. So I can't be an exception to that, or I'll burn out. And I'm not greater than Jesus was in human form. And so there's two simple principles here. The principle of the oxygen mask, you know this well. In the rare instance that there might be an emergency on a plane, you're instructed to put your mask on first before you try to help others. The principle is that take care of yourself first, or you will not be able to lead others. And that's a truism that we kind of default to or reference a lot. But the first person you need to lead is yourself. You lead yourself first, and that's probably going to be one of the hardest leadership challenges that we'll have. Leadership theorists tell us that 40% of our time or more should be invested in leading ourselves. And the reason is because nobody else can do that for us. And so one of the best gifts we can give to the people we're leading now and in the future is a healthy, fully energized, fully surrendered to Jesus self. And so in a crisis, I just want to say to all of you who are leading, just with everything you've got, it's okay to breathe. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to find a cushion in the front of the boat and take a nap. And I know that you work all the time, and I know that you're giving your best, but just remember in the pattern of Jesus, when he just intensely ministered, there was a rhythm, there was a pattern that he would usually follow intense ministry times by times of solitude and rest and being with those that were closest to him, being with the Father. Read Mark chapter 1, where it says the whole town gathered at his doorstep one evening, and the next morning he got up early in the morning while it was still dark and went out to pray. Then the disciples came and found him and said, "Everybody's looking for you." Literally, it says that. And Jesus said this, "Well, then let's go somewhere else." I love the permission not to be driven by the tyranny of the urgent or just the needs of others, but that sense of being led. What is the Father saying, and what is the purpose in this? I can't do everything, but I will have grace and faith for what he's told me to do. So Jesus practiced the art of self-leadership, rested, recalibrated, reminded himself he was loved by the Father. And just as Jesus had to invest regularly in keeping his calling clear, you and I do too as well. The second principle, real quickly, is the principle of the trellis, and that's the idea of maintaining personal disciplines. And maybe you've heard this reference that habits or disciplines or practices in our life become a trellis. They don't cause the growth, but they help the plant grow a certain way, help it take a certain form and shape and direction. And so in this season, we don't want to forsake certain rhythms and practices that make space for us to grow, to make space for us to be transformed. And so the practices in and of themselves aren't what's sacred, but it's what happens in the context of those practices that's sacred, what God is doing in our life. So I don't know what you're like. I wake up in the morning, and if I go right to Zoom calls, that is just lethal for me. So I've got a practice in this new season is there is no screen time until there's scripture. There's just like, until I've been in the word, I know that until I pray, my public life is supported by this private root system of prayer and being in the scriptures. And so I've put certain practices into place in this season that are really unique to this season, but also are going to be practices that will form me in a way that'll carry on as I head into the aftermath of whatever this will be. And so I want to just say to you real quickly as I finish, pastor, leader, we need you to pray. We need you to dream. We need you to preach. We need you to make calls. We need you to send text messages, write letters, be compassionate, write devotions, empower and equip people, encourage one another, give hope, point us back to God's word, listen to the Spirit's whispers, remind us that we have hope in Jesus and he won't fail us. But we also need you to take a break, to breathe, to keep your Sabbath, to turn your phone and computer off, enjoy your family, be present in relationships, even take a nap, go for a walk, do push-ups, laugh, process your inner experiences. Let's draw from the life of Jesus, because the fruit we want to bear is the fruit of Jesus. Thanks. I'm going to put the pause there.
That's
Angie.
great. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Pastor Randy. You just pastored all of us. We have over 200 people on this call right now, well over 200 registered, and I believe hundreds and thousands of people will see this presentation. I know that I can speak for everyone as the chats are coming in. Thank you, Pastor Randy. Thank you, Pastor Jared. Thank you, Pastor Ricky. Outstanding. We actually have really good news. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and they've been coming in. I guess the first that I want to kick off with, as we just heard this incredible presentation by Pastor Randy to focus on the inner life. Randy explained some of his practices. So I would love to hear from Jared and Ricky. What are some of the personal spiritual practices that you're implementing in this time? So Jared, if you'd like to start. Ricky, I'm glad you're back. When Randy was talking about the storm, you had a storm in Savannah and knocked your power out. So glad you're back.
I think one of the things that I decided to do, and I thought was helpful modeling as well, was to continue the disciplines, the routines, the structure of my personal devotional life and spiritual discipline practices, and to be able to refer to those of the congregation. I felt that that was something that should not change. Modeling the way in a pattern of trellis. I love the metaphor, Randy. To keep the trellis, that the congregation is very aware of my practices. And I felt that it would give continuity, that it would reinforce what's never changing, our relationship with Jesus, and that in a time of crisis and storm, nothing needed to change about the personal choices we make about how we behave with Jesus and how we engage with him. So I think that this is also, in kind of, for some people, a Sabbath, and for other people, life is just incredibly crazy. But for those of us maybe without children at home, for example, that may have actually found a little bit of extra time to enjoy listening and hearing and some solitude in some ways that I haven't before. I think too, recognizing that even as an introvert, I am really ready for people. And my recognition and appreciation for the need for me to engage with others and finding some fresh ways to do that remotely, but significantly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jared. Pastor Ricky, you're up. What do you do? Teach us your ways and make sure you unmute yourself.
Now you can hear me. The storm is over. Yay. You know what I do? I get up every morning and I get fully dressed. I get fully dressed and I make sure that I am not only dressed, I exercise a little bit on the good days. I take naps. I keep a pattern of work. I think that it's just really important, and if you're going to survive this, is that you pace yourself. So I just try not to overwork. The problem with bringing work home is it's always coming. Like our future president said, is the Zoom calls in the morning and this, that, and the other. And before you know it, you're just doing everything that you shouldn't do. So I keep a steady pace, and that's what helps me.
So good. So this question just came in From Nikisha, I'm so glad she asked it because this is where my head's been at today. Her question is, how can we effectively lead leaders without overwhelming or overloading them during the health crisis? And then a part two is, how can we lead our leaders into action while also being considerate of their emotional needs? I would say in light of their grief stage. Because we're going to be flying up here and everyone may not be where we are.
Can I make a comment about that?
Please, Jared.
Yeah. So we're fond of using the brief form of the grief process by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And so we talk about denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And we use that as a part of our congregational language, as a part of our staff team language, and a part of our extended leadership team of volunteers. And so when we do check-ins with people and also on our initial weeks of weekend services, we talked about the grief model. We talked about where people are. We wanted to make it okay for people who are being wildly blessed during this season to not feel guilty and have to be anonymous about that. The truth of the matter is there are some people that are thriving in every way, including financially. That's the minority, but how do you make room for celebrating blessing on one extreme? And how do you make room for people who have had loved ones tragically die and aren't able to celebrate their life with any kind of a memorial service? So we are all living simultaneously as a community across all of those phases or stages. And we talk about that, we acknowledge it, we validate each of those, and we check in around what can I do that would be most helpful for you today? It's the Jesus question, what do you want me to do for you? We start our staff meetings around what can we do for you today? Let's do a check-in. And we check in on that emotional and circumstantial level because that's where Jesus tended to start the relationship. What can I do for you today? We get to our work, but we get to our work after we have attended to each other.
Excellent. Pastor Ricky or Randy, would you like to respond to that?
I think it's really important when you're dealing with death and loss, and in a church our size, it's 3 or 4 a week. It's really that many all the time. It's somebody's cousin, uncle, somebody in the church. And one of the things you have to learn to do is to not allow yourself to internalize a lot of it, and learning how to see it the way the Bible says it. That can sound real spiritual sounding, but to be absent from the body, to be present with Christ. And I have to tell myself that all the time because I'll get depressed, I'll get frustrated, and it turns on me. And there's a disease you can get at helping people. A lot of people who are first responders and people like pastors and leaders, doctors, you really can feel the pain of it. So I try to make sure that I don't overindulge myself. I don't watch too much news. I watch enough to learn. I want to be informed, but not drowning and drown. So for me, it's about balance, but it comes in waves and sometimes it's overwhelming. And I acknowledge that. When I feel overwhelmed, I say it. I'm overwhelmed right now. I need to take a break. I'm internalizing this too much. Now I can't do funerals. I'm doing digital funerals. Can you believe it? I did 2 this week. Where I can't physically go and the family can't go. It's just amazing. So all of that can be amazing, but learning how to properly say it, confess your faults that you may be healed. That's how I deal with it.
Wow. Well, as a therapist, my brain is going in so many directions, but I want for all of our attendees to capture these things. The Kubler-Ross grief and loss model. Google it and get that incorporated into your life and leadership. Number 2, Pastor Ricky mentioned compassion fatigue. That's the actual terminology for first responders. If you're a leader, pastor on this call, so many of you are, you would be considered a first responder. So research compassion fatigue. I believe there's a compassionfatigue.org. Fantastic resources to take through, go over with your staff. Become informed. Also, burnout is really a high risk right now for most leaders. So take care of you, the oxygen mask first, and then take care of others. So make sure you note those concepts. And Pastor Randy, would you like to conclude with some final thoughts on this comment, this question?
Yeah. in times like this, things get stripped down to their essence really fast. We reduce things down to what really matters most. And so excessive stuff, busy stuff, all that stuff is exposed really quick for what it is. And I think when we lead our leaders, we do them a great service by helping them clarify. As Jared shared in his presentation, we help them by clarifying what are the most essential things to our mission that we're about in this season. How are we engaging one another, and how are we reaching out together? So to keep in focus a clarity, we just clarify things to keep it really, really simple. So it's easily embraced and it's not overly taxing. I do think when we understand and recognize as well that everybody is in a different place, how they're processing this. And I'm amazed by asking just a few questions I might not have normally asked outside of a crisis like this of a leader, just to really go to the second and third question to get to the layers down. There's a lot of stuff subterranean going on in terms of fear. Really, I mean, just really strong concern about maybe it might not even be their situation, but the situation of an extended family member or a close friend, or just even the congregation as a whole. And so to help people, not just, the processing grief and loss, obviously, but how to walk in faith. Jesus's first admonition to the disciples after they woke him up so that he could panic with them is that he just calmed the storm, obviously, and then you would have thought he would have put a big hug around them, but he spoke to what is really needed in a time like this. We need a new revelation of Jesus. Faith sees a future with God in it. Fear is a future minus God. It's reality without God in it. And that's a very fearful prospect, because then it's just now me against all of that. But faith sees God in your future. And I heard it once said, the devil wants to give you a guided tour of a godless future, and so the devil wants to paint a picture for you of what the future looks like without God in it. Faith sees God. Faith acknowledges the facts, but sees something beyond that, something greater than that. And so they were afraid in the storm, but they were even more afraid after Jesus calmed the storm, because they got a different revelation of Jesus. And they had a new revelation of his power. Timothy Keller said about this passage of scripture, he said, Jesus had power and the storm had power. The difference was Jesus loves you, the storm doesn't. And so their lives became reoriented. My thought then is their lives became reoriented around the love and the power of Jesus in a new way. And I think if we can help people see that as we come through this and the other side of this, a greater revelation of Jesus. He's greater than the storm. He's already set a table before us in our tomorrows. He's already gone ahead of us. This is the shadow, not the substance. I'm walking through something, but I'm going to get through it by going through it. And the other side of it is going to be an evidence, an orientation of life again in a renewed way around his goodness and greatness.
Wow. This time with you all was so rich. It was so valuable, and there's so much gratitude coming through the chat section. And I'm so grateful to have you here. I see a third webinar coming up in the next 2 weeks that's emerging for me, and I pray that Life Pacific can continue to add value. Thank you all for your participation, and thank you all of you that joined us today. We're going to get this out to you via email, presentations, and recordings. So we thank you for joining us. I'm going to pass this off to Lena, and we will close up. Lena.
Thank you so much, Angie. We really do hope this was a value for you. We love, love, love our panelists. Thank you guys so much for being here and joining us. I was scribbling down notes for myself and my own personal life and for friends, and I was getting personal messages throughout the whole thing. This has been tremendous. Thank you so much. And we appreciate the shout out to our MASL program. This was brought to you by the program itself. So we're so grateful to Dr. Ramila Wanson for putting this together. If you are ready to get unstuck, if you're ready to be further equipped, like Randy said, if you're ready for clarity in the middle of the chaos, or to reorient yourself after this disorienting situation this season, we would love to chat with you. And we're going to send links out with the webinar link itself. So you have a recording and you'll have links. We are doing webinars next week for our MASL program. So if you are interested in furthering your leadership, if you're interested in further equipping yourself, join us next week. We are so grateful for our panelists and for you for joining us. Thank you for the work that you are doing on the field. Thank you for the leading that you are doing. Thank you for investing in the people that you are leading. And we're so grateful. We are praying for you and for your churches, for your teams, for your families, for your communities. So with that, Randy, would you close us in prayer today?
Yeah, absolutely. Father, I thank you for your Holy Spirit that has bonded us together through the blood of Jesus Christ to be one body, to be one family together, and that it's comforting to know that we are not alone. We don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. We don't have to be the sole voice in any matter. We don't have to be an expert in every occasion, that there's something that together, Lord, that will bring forth this greater reality of who you are in this season and what you're doing. And that's our heart, to be part of that. And Lord, I thank you for every one of these women and men who've gathered together around this time to just be equipped and strengthened and encouraged. And God, I just pray that more than anything, that they would know that they're not alone, that you're in the boat with them, that you're more than enough, that there is the love and power that you have displayed and continue to display, God, that will shape our life and sustain us in the moment now, but also bring us into a new reality going forward as well. God, may you give the spirit of wisdom and revelation to everybody as they lead in their own unique contexts and settings. Grant them the grace, Lord. Let them know that they're more than able to do what you've told them they could do, to be who you've called them to be. And they don't have to do more or less than that, but to be literally somebody who has their eyes fixed on you, Jesus, the one who is the author and the finisher of their faith. Lord, bless their places of ministry, bless their homes, bless their family, open the windows of heaven, pour out your spirit, provide for every need. In Jesus' name, amen.